So I was reading, I got a book loaned to me about Colonel Fountain, and he's a historical figure, in case you're not familiar with him. But he was an attorney in the early 1890s and such. But anyway, he was murdered, and it's a murder mystery. But the aspect of it was, as they're documenting when he went over to Lincoln County and how long it took him to travel across there. Well, just from here to Alamogordo, it says, I guess the map is like 70 miles. Maybe if you straightened it out and you did a straight line, it might be a little shorter. But 60 miles, and you traveled on an average day, 20 miles a day. Even with some sort of horse that was really active, it would take you a good 20-something miles a day to travel, just from here to Alamogordo. So that means that's probably about, at least, unless you got a horse that's just like Long Ranger, one of those horses that can just run and ride, and you could do it maybe at least 2 days. That would be 30 miles or so a day. And everybody who's from New Mexico, we know what it's like between here and there. Just driving it. If you've ever had to stop or had a flat tire between here and Alamogordo, that's pretty crazy. Out there alone at night, how dark it is and everything, and how hostile it is. And now we just zip. We just get in our cars and just travel over there. And it's just no big deal anymore to us. But that traveling experience has a parallel to the way that we are as Christians when it comes to our living and life and traveling. We know that life many times is described as a walk with Christ, a living with Christ, living with God, walking with God. So we have a place where we call a home. Is it a house? Is it a home? And how many have you lived in throughout your life? Chances are, even if you're a young person, you have never stayed in the same physical house. You probably have moved around. I know the first, I think it was 7 years of marriage, we moved 7 times. And it wasn't necessarily, sometimes it was quick, it was weird because of the being in the military and the changes that happened. And then it got to the point where when we got back here to Las Cruces, it was almost like within a year we wanted to move because we moved so much. It was like, we got to move. And now I don't want to move. I'm where I'm at, and I want to stay where I'm at. And I get the urges from my children to, come on, Dad, come on down, move to Texas, move to here. And I'm like, no, I'm not, I don't want to move. It doesn't matter whether it's my home or not, but I can't keep it to the same level that it was when I bought it. It's like every time I turn around, the cooler's running water off the top. There's weeds growing everywhere. So even the place that I call home is in a state of decay, and it's constantly having to be worked on. I hope you know where I'm going with this. Because it's a serious thing that we need to remember as Christians. That it's the same with this world and the way that we're journeying through this. And Peter so keenly said to us in 1 Peter chapter 2, 11 and 12. He says, Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles, abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, that they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Well, there's a couple of things that very clearly he's saying. He's urging them as people who are temporary. And he also says that over in the very first chapter, verse 1, he says what? He calls the Christians who are out there in exile, he calls them in exile, in a dispersion. That's the way Peter sees that Christians living in this world are about. is the idea that they are exiles. Now, as you're journeying anywhere, when you're traveling, even in this today, there are things that you have to do if you're going to have any common sense. Even with all this technology, you should probably have a spare tire. You should probably have enough fuel to get to the next town. You should probably, especially today with our technology, have a phone where you can call for 911. The same principle is always applied, whether you were on a horse, whether you're walking. There were things you had to do in order to protect yourself on a journey. And it's no different from today as Christians when we think about the idea of journeying through and knowing this. So we are the ones in exile in this world spiritually because of what's going on around us. So when we look at the word pilgrim and looking at the original Greek word, it's really interesting because it's a sojourner, somebody who's temporary in a strange place. Has anyone, I think there's a lot of you, and even if you've just gone over to Juarez to do some shopping, we're close enough to the border, or drove by, you could look across into another country and see how different it is. And you don't feel, when I was over there doing the mountain bike ride over there, and I'd never seen America from looking from the Mexico side over. It was always from the American side looking over to Mexico. And so when I was over there, I remember looking back at Asarco and El Paso and going, that's a weird view. And I look around and I realize there's nobody here. Well, one, I couldn't speak the language, but this is not my country. And it was so uncomfortable, no matter how long I was there, and how comfortable and how nice they treated me, and they did, and I was safe, it was not my land. Abraham felt the same way, but yet he said that land we know was being promised to him, but he was a foreigner, he was a stranger on that land. We are the same. So another reference in looking up in Strong's is it's a reference to heaven as a native country. This is the way that the word sojourner and pilgrim has been applied into the New Testament. So when New Testament writers, such as Peter, refer to us as that, it's because he's looking at us and it's in the context of our residence is somewhere else. That he sees us as one that is journeying. And also the patriarchs, when it talks about them. So it also to describe Christians that's where our final citizenship is. This citizenship, this legal residence that we can have in this country is not there. So we're temporary. We get that, don't we? I mean, how many sermons do you listen to? How many times do you have to read the obituaries? How many times do we see the news when people are dying? We know that. We get that. But sometimes we don't act like that. We don't understand it. It's like we're waiting for our time. We're waiting to the last minute or something and not constantly remembering that we're the sojourner, we're the temporary one in this. It's a little bit of arrogance to ignore the fact that even if you're not in God's kingdom, your journey here is temporary. It may not be with God, but it's still a temporary journey, and you will die someday. And you're going to go to a final destination. All of us are going to go to a final destination. But Peter's advising Christians. He's telling us, be careful. Be careful of what's going on around you. Be aware of your journey, because that journey is perilous. In a pagan land. Now this is interesting because you'd say, well, we don't have any pagans anymore. Yeah, we do. Look at the way that it's defined. It's a person who does not acknowledge your God. So are atheists pagans? Yeah. People who proclaim to, say that I believe in the Yahweh, the Christian God, but yet then turns around and completely does something against what he teaches, that's not belief in my God. That's a belief in a God that they define, but it's not the one true God. So does that mean they're pagans? Yeah. Because look what it says. A person who does not acknowledge your God. And hopefully you've defined it correctly. I mean, because otherwise... But the point was that it's not just a pagan word used 2,000 years ago to apply to a bunch of cultures that were barbarians, but they're pagans today. People who don't acknowledge your God. And the other thing is, their motivated is different. Their motivation's different. So you see this also in Christians who proclaim to be Christians, I should say, and evangelists, who really the motivation is about their own personal gains and about what they can accomplish and the flattery and the power and things in which they can accumulate. The same was back in the first century. The very same thing. People who are coming in the church, sneaking in among them and trying to win people over with some flattery words, some sort of, devious idea. So when we look at this, it's interesting because we see the evidences of it all around us today. If you look and you think about it. So one of the biggest one is the humanism. Humanism is the idea of really magnifying human and really empowering and putting us above God in atheism. And it's continually increased. I really do. The more I think about it, about the pre-flood world I talked about, see such a parallel that as we advance and become what we believe smarter and smarter, the dumber and dumber we are because we're ignoring God and we're building science as a God. And that's the only God that an atheist has, is science. And it's a sad world, and that changes too. Science, because science discovers new aspects and refines their theories and reapplies things. There's just very few things that are very consistent. Thermodynamics, the laws of thermodynamics. Looking at the way that marriages are being treated, just casually, it's still happening. And it's still on the increase. And all of these things are ripples. They're ripples that create more and more paganistic, more and more hazards to us as we journey through this life. The sexuality orientation that we're trying to remodify that started out with redefining marriage. And everybody said, well, okay, 50, 60 years ago, that would have never been even considered of. Now, modern people would say, well, that's just because they're backwards. You're just old-fashioned. That's what I used to tell my grandpa and my dad. My dad would say something. I would say it inside myself. Well, my dad only has a 4th grade education. I'm going to college. I know economics. I know proper grammar and all blah, blah, blah. And we always seem to think somehow our generation's smarter than the last. And maybe, there might be some degree that we are smarter. But when we're changing moral values, they're just continuing to continuing to slide and go down. And that is really powerful when we think about the type of paganism that is surrounding us today. Our faith is constantly under attack. More so today than ever. And they don't have to lay a hand on you. But they're starting to lay hands on people that don't agree with them, right? There's a lot of violence that's happening in this country right now to people who disagree with one another. And if you don't think that can turn on Christians, then you need to wake up. Because it can. Now, I'm not saying, you need to protect yourself. I'm not trying to say this in some sort of a call for action or something. I'm not. Because we don't find that in the first century. We don't find, Peter going, hey, everybody muster at Paul's house. Let's get our sticks and clubs and knives together and we need to encamp and stand there and fight. No. But the ridiculing of our faith is slowly again something that has creeped in, built up, become tolerant. When you can beat up somebody and just keep picking on them and devaluating them, then eventually everybody's fine with it. You see, that's exactly what cultures do when they try to annihilate certain cultures and races, is they just devalue them to the point where they're pretty meaningless. That race of people, They don't have no value anymore. And that's what's happening in a very subtle, dangerous way with Christianity, is the fact that we're starting to be so devaluated, so run down, so watered down, to the point where if they start to come at us and attack us, they didn't have any value anyway. We have to be the light that's shining those moral values as we journey through this life. How in the world is anyone going to see God? Because they will not see it in this pagan world that's all around us. So how do we survive this? Now, I'm going to run through this list because it's pretty intensive, but usually I'm trying to talk to people that, as we think about this, refocusing ourselves on some of the foundational concepts that we should know, that we need to go to and remember. Because when we see this happening, the evidences that we see are happening in the way that we're being attacked and run down. And our children, we talk about the future generation, what's it going to be like for those children, that are coming. So we need to teach this not only to ourselves, but we need to teach it to others. So one of the things that we need to do as we live in this pilgrim's land is have a hope for the grace that's coming, the favor. Grace is something that, when you talk about mercy and grace, is a favor. Something that God is bringing to us, and He's given to us a certain portion. But there's more for us to come. We also see to be holy, is to be sanctified, be set apart. Holy not in the sense of perfection, but holy in that we are different, we're unique, and people can see that. And the other thing that we need to do is to show the world the love that we have for one another. This is exactly what Christ said to His disciples. I give you this command, to love one another, to love each other as I have loved you. You love one another. And when you love one another, then the people around you in this world are going to see that you are my disciples. Can they tell we're disciples by the way we love one another? And love will always overcome hate. It may not be in the way that we think, but it will. It will. And that's the problem now. It's actually what we find in conflict is hate against hate. That's what we find. Desire God's Word. We have to keep that alive. Is keep desiring to want God's Word every day. Go to that source. We need to proclaim His praises. Stand up for Him. Talk about your blessed life. Don't be afraid to give God some credit in your everyday life among the world. Don't try to be a stealth Christian. There's no such thing. There's no technology that we can apply to you as a Christian that's going to keep you hidden and protected. That's not why we're here. We're here to represent God as His Son did. Well, it didn't end well for Him, but He still pleased the Father. And the Father glorified Him, and that's what we should desire. Every good work that we're doing as Christians goes to the glory of God. Always remember that. Don't become fatigued by it. And endure the hardships like we are taught, like what James teaches, what we see, that it's hard, but we need to be patient and work with it. So when we think about this, understand you and I, as Christians, are sojourning in a paganistic world, in a hostile country, and we have to take care of ourselves. This is the same apostle who said, be diligent. Why? Because the Satan is out there like a lion, waiting for an opportunity to strike you. So as we're journeying along this life, trying to make it through, we have to look out for the attacks. And look out. But keep your eyes on heaven. If you're here tonight and there's something we can do to help you with your relationship with Him, I hope that you will afford us that opportunity. And if you're comfortable, let us know some way, and we will love to assist you. So think about these things while we stand and sing.
Bring Christ your broken life, so marred by sin.